Joanna Demafelis left her home and family with a dream to return in a few years with earnings that would lift them all toward a better life. 4 years later, she did come home. Joanna, 29 years old, arrived inside a wooden box. Her fate so tragic that her own mother collapsed beside the coffin. What happened to Joanna in Kuwait stands among the most harrowing cases of domestic worker abuse ever recorded. She was beaten, she was tortured, and when her employers were finished, they stuffed her body into a freezer and fled the country. There she remained, frozen and undiscovered, for over a year. February 6, 2018. Kuwait City. Authorities arrived at an apartment to carry out a routine eviction. The place had been abandoned since late 2016, a silent museum of a hasty escape. As they catalogued the leftover furniture, nothing seemed amiss. Then their attention turned to a large freezer. Standing in the corner, its motor quietly running, a cold dread settled over the room. With a click, the seal broke. Inside, shrouded in layers of glacial frost, was a horrific discovery. The twisted, frozen corpse of a woman, cruelly crammed into the icy compartment. The sight was so devastating that hardened officers reportedly wept. She was entombed so completely in ice that fingerprinting would require a slow, agonizing thaw. The forensic report put a name to the tragedy: Joanna Demafelis, a 29-year-old domestic worker from the Philippines, missing since 2016. While the act of leaving her frozen for a year was monstrous, the autopsy revealed the true depth of the cruelty. Her body was a ledger of pain: multiple broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, and catastrophic internal damage from repeated violence. Marks on her neck pointed to a final, failed attempt to strangle her. Together, the evidence formed an undeniable record of sustained torture. Yet, the most harrowing detail was still to come. According to police reports, Joanna's employer, Nader Asaf, confessed to a final, unspeakable act. He admitted to placing Joanna inside the freezer while she was still unconscious, but not yet deceased. If this confession is true, it means Joanna Demafelis did not die from her beatings alone, but may have awakened in darkness to freeze to death, abandoned and helpless. Nader Asaf, a Lebanese national, and his Syrian wife Mona Hassan had employed Joanna as their maid. They fled Kuwait in November 2016, leaving her body concealed behind them. Yet, who was the woman whose life ended in such profound horror? Joanna Daniela Demafelis was born on June 24, 1988, in Iloilo City, Philippines. The sixth of 9 children, she grew up in the care of her parents, Cristeto and Eva, hard-working farmers in Barangay Ferraris. Their world was one of humble routine, sustained by 2 leased hectares of rice fields. For a time, the harvest provided, but for a family of 11, enough was a precarious state. With 9 children to feed, clothe, and educate, every grain of rice was measured, every peso stretched to its limit. The land, which had once promised sustenance, could no longer hold the weight of their collective dreams. It was from this pressing need that Joanna's own dream was forged: to journey far from the familiar fields of Iloilo and secure a future that the tired soil at home could not guarantee. Even as a student at Serra National High School, Joanna's defining traits were her diligence and a profound selflessness. Teachers and classmates recall her, not for lofty personal ambitions, but for her quiet, steadfast dedication to her family. Her own dreams were inextricably woven with theirs. She spoke of wanting to support her siblings' education and to finally lift her parents from the grip of poverty. In essence, Joanna's greatest aspiration was to be the foundation upon which her family could build their futures. After graduation, with characteristic resolve, she forewent further studies and immediately sought work. In 2013, she found a position as a housekeeper for relatives in Parañaque, Metro Manila. It was a modest life, but a secure and kind one. Her employers treated her with warmth, and Joanna, in turn, found genuine contentment in her role. She would later look back on this time with a gentle smile, remembering it as a chapter of simple human kindness, a stark and cruel prelude to what awaited her abroad. The family's fragile peace was shattered by the winds of Super Typhoon Yolanda in November 2013. The storm, one of history's strongest, left behind a world of broken concrete and broken lives. For the Demafelises, the destruction was deeply personal. Their home was gutted. The familiar avocado tree of their childhood, now uprooted. The leased fields they depended on were left waterlogged and strewn with debris. The season's labor vanished overnight. Faced with ruin, the family took on crushing debt. From her relative's home in Manila, Joanna felt a helplessness deeper than despair. Her purpose to lift her family up now felt like a failed promise. In the storm's bleak aftermath, she sent a quiet, determined message to an aunt. "Auntie, could you help me? I'd like to go abroad." Those words set into motion a journey from which she would never return. The decision was a cold calculus of necessity. For Filipinos like Joanna, overseas domestic work in the Middle East is the most reliable economic engine available, offering wages up to 10 times those at home. By 2016, over half of the 2.2 million Filipinos working abroad were in the region, fueling a massive labor pipeline. Despite well-documented risks, Joanna was fully aware of the danger. Reports of abuse, confinement, and deaths among migrant workers were frequent. Yet, the cost of inaction, a family paralyzed by debt, a home in ruins, siblings without prospects, was a greater, more certain tragedy. Her choice was not naive hope, but a strategic sacrifice. With her family's reluctant blessing and their collective savings paid to a recruitment agency, she departed in May 2014 under a 2-year contract. Her communication was infrequent and brief, and in those short calls she offered no complaints, only quiet reassurance. In 2016, instead of returning to her family, Joanna signed a new contract. The debts at home were not yet settled. Her new employers were a Lebanese-Syrian couple, Nader Asama Saf and Mona Hassoun, who lived in an Ashbilia district apartment. It was to be her final job. A deep sense of unease took root from the start. A compatriot living in the building became Joanna's only lifeline. In hushed conversations, Joanna revealed she was living in a state of monitored captivity. The walls of the apartment feeling less like shelter and more like a cell. The punishments had begun. Slaps, hits, casual cruelty. By September, the abuse had morphed into something far more sinister. Brutal, unexplained beatings. She was now expressly forbidden from stepping outside. Her friend, alarmed, begged her to escape and seek help from the embassy. But Joanna, isolated and profoundly afraid, could not muster the courage. The fear of her employers outweighed the fear of her deteriorating reality. That same month, Joanna managed to contact her sister, Griselda, back in the Philippines. She hinted at her suffering but tried to downplay it, not wanting her parents to worry. Despite everything, she made a promise. She would come home in 2018. She did return in 2018, but not the way anyone had hoped. That phone call in September 2016 was the last time anyone heard from Joanna. Months passed in silence. Joanna's family grew worried. She used to call regularly, but now her phone was dead, and her social media profiles were gone. They knew something was wrong. They contacted government agencies for help. Officials tried to find her through her recruitment agency, Our Lady of Mount Carmel Global E-Human Resources Incorporated. But they soon learned the agency's license had been revoked months earlier. When they tracked down former staff, they discovered another problem. Joanna's first contract had ended, and the agency had no record of where she was sent next. The trail had gone cold. Yet the most grievous wound was one of neglect. The family's nightmare was prolonged by an unconscionable failure. Philippine authorities in Kuwait were alerted that Joanna was missing in January 2017. The report was filed and forgotten. No one acted. This silence from those duty-bound to help forced her family to endure nearly 2 more years of torturous uncertainty, not knowing she had already been lost to them. Then came the discovery, and with it the timeline of a cover-up. Kuwaiti investigators pieced together that Nader Asaf and Mona Hassoun had fled in November 2016. But just before their departure, they had gone to Kuwaiti immigration and filed a report. They claimed Joanna had absconded. It was a cruel fiction, a bureaucratic smokescreen thrown up at the very moment she was trapped lifeless in their freezer. So, what finally led police to the apartment in February 2018? It wasn't the search for Joanna. It wasn't even the active investigation into the couple for writing bad checks. It was a landlord seeking back rent. After securing an eviction order, police accompanied him to the long-abandoned unit. Their task was administrative. Their discovery was unthinkable. Inside, a lone freezer hummed in the corner. Opening it revealed the frozen body of Joanna Demafelis. The tragic truth, found by sheer accident. The ensuing international manhunt, coordinated by Interpol, ended with their capture in Damascus in February 2018. As Nader was extradited to Lebanon and Mona held in Syria, investigators pieced together a story of profound depravity. The most damning testimony came from an unexpected source: Nader's mother. She recounted witnessing Mona's savage assaults on Joanna. Slaps, hair-pulling and head-slamming, while the maid cried out for her to stop. The violence was so disturbing that Nader's mother fled the apartment. Nader himself confessed to disposing of Joanna in the freezer, alleging his wife had developed a sadistic addiction to the torture. Nearby residents confirmed a climate of fear, recalling shouts and ominous banging sounds from the couple's apartment. The tragic reality is that the system was designed to prevent her escape. In Kuwait, the kafala sponsorship system ties a worker's legal existence to their employer. For Joanna, this meant her visa, her residency, and her right to stay were under the control of Nader and Mona. Leaving them would not have been an act of freedom, but a crime, rendering her an illegal, subject to detention and deportation. This legal stranglehold not only trapped Joanna, but also paralyzed any would-be helpers. The shouts and bangs neighbors heard were cries against a system that sanctioned her captivity. Joanna's case was far from unique. In 2017 alone, the Philippine embassy in Kuwait received nearly 6,000 complaints of abuse from Filipino workers, including cases of physical violence, sexual harassment, and rape. Joanna was one of many, but her death became the symbol of a broken system. Joanna's death provoked a national outcry in the Philippines. President Duterte called it a national shame and slapped an immediate ban on sending new workers to Kuwait, while offering repatriation to those who had overstayed. The move was largely symbolic. It didn't help the 250,000 Filipinos already there, but the message was clear. Filipinos are not slaves, Duterte said. They do not go abroad to return in a coffin. The journey that began with hope ended in a sorrowful homecoming. Joanna's body finally returned to the Philippines on February 16, 2018. As her sister clung to the coffin in Manila, and her mother wept over it in Iloilo, their "Justice for Joanna" shirts became a national symbol. President Duterte and state officials attended her funeral, a stark contrast to the anonymous departure she had made years prior. On March 3, she was buried in the very town she had left to save. Her dream of a prosperous return, forever replaced by the grim reality of a martyr's rest. The legal aftermath unfolded across 3 countries. Kuwait acted first, convicting Nader Asaf and Mona Hassan of murder, and sentencing them to death in April 2018. But since they had fled, the trial was in absentia. Syria then tried Mona separately, handing down an 8 to 15-year prison sentence in 2019. Nader's case in Lebanon entered a prolonged limbo. As of 2023, his trial was still ongoing without a verdict, and Lebanon refused to extradite him to Kuwait. So the final accounting falls painfully short. One killer may walk free relatively young. The other's punishment remains uncertain. And the ultimate penalty imposed by Kuwait has never been executed. Joanna Demafelis was neither the first overseas worker to die at the hands of an employer, nor will she be the last. Such cases emerge with grim regularity globally. In a recent Malaysian case, a former MasterChef contestant and her ex-husband received 34-year sentences for murdering their 28-year-old Indonesian maid, Nurafaya Dung Deng. The victim had endured prolonged torture, including an attempt to extract 6 of her front teeth with pliers. These workers depart with hope, carrying their families' futures on their shoulders. They withstand isolation and grueling work for the promise of a better tomorrow. But for some, that promise curdles into a trap of unimaginable horror with no way out. Joanna Demafelis was 29. Her sole ambition was to lift her family from poverty. She faced the world alone, armed with little but devotion. In 2018, she at last returned to her mother, not warm and triumphant as vowed, but frozen and silent, murdered and stored in a freezer, her homecoming reduced to a coffin. If you or your friend or relative is a migrant worker in an abusive situation, your silence is not required. It is your right to seek safety and support. Reach out to your embassy, talk to a trusted confidant, or contact an organization dedicated to helping workers in distress. Remember, no opportunity is worth your well-being, and no employer has the right to take your dignity or your life. You deserve respect,